What is going on, YouTube? So coming back today with a video that I've wanted to do for a little while. So I did a video maybe a year back talking about Big 12 expansion. I went into pretty good depth about it. But, you know, with Big 12 Media Days just passing and the expansion talks really heating up again, and a bunch of newfound teams and a bunch of newfound possibilities and a little bit of an outline laid out, I wanted to give my thought on it. I'm going to give you guys my 10 best possible candidates. Everyone has their best possible candidates and the reason why. But also what it would be like if they added to 12 teams or added to 14 teams. So if they added 2 or 4, I'm going to give my possibilities for both. So just to start, if you guys aren't too aware with the Big 12 right now, they've lost 4 teams in the past, I believe it's 8 years, maybe 7. They've lost Mizzou, Colorado, Nebraska, and Texas A&M. Colorado, in my opinion, was probably the least of the 4 losses. The Nebraska and Texas A&M ones hurt a little bit. Broke off the Texas A&M rivalry, and they do not play that anymore. I feel like it'll get reignited eventually, but same thing with the Kansas-Missouri rivalry. Right now in football, it wouldn't be big, but in basketball, it definitely would help out the TV ratings a little bit. But again, even without that, the Big 12 still does fine with basketball. So let's start with my 10 possible candidates, and I'm going to put all this stuff in the description below because I'm going to be going over a lot of stuff in this video if you guys just want to see the quick recap of it. So this is in an order from 1 to 10, of 10 being least, I wouldn't say least likely, but worst possible to best possible candidate. Even if you're on the list, you're still probably a pretty good candidate. So starting with number 10, this is an interesting one. I say Mizzou. I get it. They left the Big 12. They're probably not coming back. But in my mind, Mizzou is not an SEC team. They should not be in the SEC. And I think if the Big 12 had a lucrative enough offer, they might be able to draw some interest to get Mizzou back. Probably not. Probably not. But I think if they were able to do something where, Texas said we'll get rid of the Longhorn network and, we'll do an entire revenue sharing, basically league network that, look good, like the ACC just did one, Big 12 should have one too. Sorry about that. And the possibilities of revenue look great enough, then you know what, you might be able to draw a team like Mizzou back. If you had heavy interest from Mizzou, I'd say take them over anyone else. But again, that you're probably not going to draw heavy interest. Number 9, Colorado State. Colorado State's an intriguing one for one reason, because they're actually somewhat close to Big 12 country, but at the same time, I don't think Colorado State is a good enough athletic department across the board, at least yet, to be able to make that jump to a Power 5 team. Last year they were a respectable college football team. This year they're supposed to be also. Basketball, not really their strongest suit. Geographically it would make sense, especially if you put them in a North Division, but overall I don't think so. So at number 8, USF. So UCF's been talked about as a major possibility. I have UCF higher on the list. I'll be getting to them in a little bit. USF has had a tremendous breakthrough with their football program, though. Long term, that might be promising. Again, basketball, they're not the greatest. But the fact that, USF, at least in my mind, has the ability to be a top 3 non-Power 5 team this year is just, it might be an intriguing possibility long term. Again, long-term success is a big thing to keep in mind there. Number 7, I got UConn, and UConn's a team that, while in football they're up and down, even though they do look pretty promising this year, this is adding because you get basketball with UConn. You're adding a team that has had, 2-3 national championships over the last decade and a half, and you know what? You bring another great college basketball team to a conference that already is arguably the best college basketball conference in the country, maybe barring the ACC. So number 6, I've got Memphis, and you know what? Memphis might be a little bit higher on the list than on most people's list than I have them. But Memphis, they're in a down spot right now with basketball. Traditionally, they are a very good basketball team. Football, they've had a breakthrough recently, but I really don't know how sustainable that success is going to be after the departure of Justin Fuente and Paxton Lynch. Again, if they have a big year of football and basketball, then I think that's something to definitely consider. Geographically, it definitely makes sense. They're not too far away from the Oklahoma schools or the Kansas schools or Iowa State. It's not close by any means, but at least it's kind of like a center point. It's not like when they added West Virginia. And then at number 5, I got UCF. I didn't bring this up with USF. The thing you get with UCF and USF is you open up a new pipeline with recruiting in Florida, which could be a very big thing for the Big 12, especially for teams like Texas and OU, and then up-and-coming recruiting teams like Baylor was, but like a TCU or like maybe like a West Virginia. They're not really up-and-coming, but they hold their own sometimes. So, my whole thing with UCF is just, obviously their football program is not doing great right now. But traditionally, again, one of the better non-Power 5 schools in football, basketball, they at least normally hold their own. Again, not a great basketball school, but a big school at that, one of the biggest enrollments in the country. Again, you open up a big TV market, a big recruiting pipeline. UCF have already said they will expand their stadium by, I believe they said by adding 20,000 seats to Bright House Network Stadium. A decent stadium already, but definitely not a Power 5 type stadium. So at number 4, and this is where we're starting to get into my legit possibilities. At number 4, I got Houston. And obviously Houston has an array of opinions on why they should or should not be in the Big 12. Obviously, when you just look at them from a pure football and geographic standpoint, they make more sense than almost anyone. Tom Herman, depending on how long he stays there, has developed a great football program there. They compete with almost every single Power 5 team in the country. They beat Florida State in a bowl game last year. Preseason top 15 for a lot of people. Now, obviously the recruiting thing's a bit, adding another team like Houston that's already recruiting as a top 25 recruiting class the last 2 years, putting them inside the Big 12, that would hurt teams like, Texas Tech, TCU, Texas, just overall in the recruiting game now, because then you have to compete with a Power 5 school down in Houston. So at number 3, I've got Cincinnati, and Cincinnati has something that's had a really good ring to it recently to me. Cincinnati does seem kind of like a Power 5 school. Cincinnati and UConn both seem like athletically they could definitely be that way. Cincinnati, again, normally a pretty good football program, very good basketball program. Geographically gives West Virginia a close rival, and they make sense. Football, maybe a little bit more consistency, expand the stadium a little bit. They are a city school, which is something that's not very apparent in the Big 12, maybe outside of Texas. I'd say the next biggest after Texas is West Virginia, Texas Tech, OU maybe, and TCU. I guess TCU is technically somewhat of a city school, but not really. If you've been to the campus, you understand what I'm saying. Anyway, get back on subject here. Cincinnati, a school that, like I said, it has a good ring in my mind to being a Power 5 school. Again, kind of not exactly similar to Florida, but you open up a new recruiting pipeline in Ohio, which can funnel out some new recruits. You get to compete with the Big Ten a little bit with their recruiting area. You open up a new TV market in Cincinnati, which, like I said, is a city market that is something you don't get from a lot of college towns with the Big 12. So at number 2, and this is one that a lot of people I don't think will have this high, but I think Boise State. Now, Boise State, there's 2 great reasons why you should add them and 2 reasons why you should not. One, I'll start with the why you should not. Why you should not is because of obviously the geographic area. It's not really close to anything. 2, athletically all around, they're not a great school athletically. Obviously football, they've built a very good program there. But basketball, not really their best suit either. Now, the 2 reasons why, again, you open up an entirely new part of the country to recruit in for the Big 12. Granted, Idaho, the fact that you get to open up that Midwest, Northwest part of the country, might be able to snag more like offensive lineman type recruits. Really get into a part of the country that I'd say is split between the Pac-12 and the Big 10 right now. So, secondly, is obviously you get a great football program into the Big 12. You'd add a football program that can compete year in and year out, in my opinion, with really the best of them. They bring them into the Power 5. I'll get in a little bit more why Boise State has a good ring to it as a football competitor in divisions after this. And number 1 at this point, BYU. BYU just makes sense. It's a good school, like academically, that you can add into the Big 12. They're pretty much good all around. Athletically, a very good traditional football program. They've been very consistently good over the last 2 decades as well. So, again, I think BYU makes the most sense out of anyone. Again, you add a team around that area where Colorado used to be. Obviously, Utah a little bit further from Big 12 territory than Colorado, but again, geographically, it makes a decent amount of sense. Another team that you could add into a North Division, and overall, just between all the points of getting, or just all the points of TV market recruiting, and then just overall athletic stability, I think BYU makes the most sense. So, start with my 2 divisions. Now, I'm going to give you guys the idea of 12 teams and 14 teams, and I'm going to go, when I do 12 teams, I'm going to use the top 2 teams I had as candidates and throw them in, and then 14, I'm going to use the top 4 candidates I had and throw them in. So 12 teams, both division setups are going to have North and South. So 12 teams, obviously you got a 6-6 split. You'd have a North division adding BYU and Boise State to a division that would already have Kansas, Kansas State, West Virginia, and Iowa State. Now, it might sound a little lopsided compared to the South, where you'd have all regular Big 12 teams, OU, Texas, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, Baylor, and TCU. But in my mind, look at it long term. Honestly, Baylor might slip back down to where they used to be. Baylor might slip back down to being a program that might not even be really that relevant anymore. We'll see what happens. But that scandal looks like it could ravage that program. Texas Tech, they're good, but again, they're just kind of overall a mediocre program long term. Oklahoma State, not to bash my own school, yeah, they're a good program, and over the last 5 to 10 years, they've probably been a top 25 program in the country. But again, it's not on the level that you would expect from, at this point, like an OU or a TCU. TCU's been very consistently good. OU, obviously, and Texas, you figure, get back to that level. But you look at the North. Kansas State, good. West Virginia, good. Boise State, like I said, I think it really adds a lot of competition to the North. Yes, the South's going to be a little bit better than the North, but still, you keep it even, especially for basketball. In basketball, you got Iowa State, Kansas. Kansas State is good from time to time. BYU has its years. So, basketball-wise, too. And, there's been talk about only adding in the teams for football, but I think with the amount of good basketball schools you have as candidates, you should add for both. All right, so go with the 14 team, and I think the 14 team way would be, I think that's the way to go. More even split, it seems a little bit more competitive to me, and while there is a pretty big geographic distance between some of the schools, you keep the traditional schools together, and then you have the new schools in the North, which could be a little bit of an intrigue for a bunch of new TV markets and a TV setup. So in the North, you'd have BYU, Boise State, Kansas, Kansas State, Iowa State, West Virginia, and Cincinnati. So again, you give West Virginia a geographic rival, you add in 2 good basketball schools between BYU and Cincinnati, and you could honestly have kind of a new in-conference rivalry between a team like Kansas and Cincinnati, or teams like Kansas and Cincinnati, 2 traditional basketball powers. And then in the South, you add Houston. That'd be the only new one, but you still keep all the Oklahoma and Texas schools together after that. You still have Oklahoma State, OU, Texas, Texas Tech, Baylor, and TCU. So like I said, to me, the 14-team setup would be the way to go. Obviously, you could include some other candidates, and I gave you my best candidates. But again, that's my whole opinion on Big 12 expansion. I go to school at a Big 12 school, so I've been right in the middle of that for the last couple of years. And it's an interesting subject, but it's one that's really been dragged out for about a year and a half now. And it'll be nice to see talks really heat up and see a direction, like a clear direction for expansion, start to make way. But anyway, that's pretty much it. See ya.